Hi there, people. So, recently, the conversation about representation in film has been getting a lot of traction. And I couldn't agree more that historically films have lacked a lot of diversity, and it's now time for any responsible filmmaker to compensate by including a lot of, different ethnic groups and members of the LGBTQ plus community and like that. And it's very wholesome to see a lot of movies with more diversity than ever before. I think this is a very wholesome and beneficial movement. There is one type of representation I don't see brought up much, and this is geographic representation. I think it's very important to spread the talent out, as it were, across the country instead of concentrating all available talent in one city, Los Angeles. Let's get into this because I think it's kind of interesting.
We got more bounce in California than all y'all combined. We got more bounce in California, like to party all the time. We got more bounce in California, where the hustlers all reside. We got more bounce in California, rolling easy when we ride.
So, as a member of two marginalized groups, both asexuality and people with autism, I'm both asexual and I have autism, I often get asked, don't you want more autistic representation, or don't you want more asexual representation? And I'd have to say no to both of those. First off, because a condition like autism, which really doesn't affect your ability to communicate any, and doesn't affect your ability to function in society or live a happy and productive life, a condition like that isn't worth putting in a movie. It's not interesting. It's just autism. It's nothing to write home about. It's not the kind of thing that I would go I'll make an entire movie about this. And the movies that have tried to create an entire movie about just being autistic are either way exaggerate the symptoms of autism so as to make the movie more interesting, or they are just boring, because autism is pretty boring, believe it or not. It's not that interesting a neurological thing. As for asexuality, I'd have to say that asexuality is really boring and is not worth putting in movies. There's no romantic trysts, there's no, pathos, no drama. And while I personally feel no romantic or sexual urges to any gender or identity or anything, I can still appreciate a dramatic romance as much as anyone else. And I mean, if the movie is only that, like Titanic or something, probably not, but a well-written romance I can definitely get behind. Imagine if all the friends in the sitcom Friends were asexuals and there was no romantic element. If they were all just platonic, that would be pretty boring. It'd get pretty blah after a while. And don't get me wrong, Friends is not a funny show by any stretch of the imagination, but part of the appeal comes from the fact that, they have romance and stuff going on in addition to their friendship. So that's what makes the show worth watching. Also, I think it's very insulting to imply that I, as someone who simply doesn't engage in sexual behavior of any kind, face the same struggles and challenges as a gay guy or a lesbian. That's very insulting, because I just don't engage in anything. I'm a neutral observer, and to compare my struggles as an asexual to those of a homosexual, that is patently ridiculous. So I can't say that I particularly advocate for either asexual representation or autistic representation. They're both relatively boring demographics to translate to the cinematic medium. However, I do think that a more interesting facet of a person than what race they are or what gender they identify as or anything like that has to be where they grow up, the place they come from, their point of origin. This influences a person's perspective, I think, a lot more than whatever race you are, or, whether you're non-binary or cis or whatever. That stuff is largely insignificant. And I think the cities across America and across the world have a larger hand in shaping a person than trivial things like the color of someone's skin. So I think it's very important to like geographically represent the world in film. I think this is possibly the biggest challenge to modern cinema, in that we still worship Hollywood, a literal 30-mile zone, as if this is some kind of necessity. Hollywood is a human construct, believe it or not, and we need more movies made by people who don't come from Hollywood. Now, the music industry, oddly enough, has not seen the same monopolization as the movie industry. Sure, there have been large city-based movements across the country, like the Minneapolis Sound with Prince and the Time in the 1980s, and Motown in the 60s, and of course we have the Memphis type bits with Elvis, and then we have East Coast and West Coast rap. But there is no one city, no 30-mile zone which encompasses the best music, the same way we assign the best movies to Hollywood for completely arbitrary reasons. Any other industry, if they went by practices like this, like imagine if all fruit was harvested within a 30-mile zone, that'd be pretty fucking weird, right? Well, there's no reason why all movies need to be made in the same goddamn state, in the same exact goddamn city, by the same exact 5 fucking studios again and again. This is boring. This is an actual lack of diversity. Now, movies these days are starting to focus more on LGBTQ and, different demographics throughout time, and that's great. I think it's very nice to see this type of diversity. But at the end of the day, if everyone is Californian, that's really not diversity. That's like faux diversity. I like seeing real stories from across the country. And if all these stories are told through the lens of one city in California, then I'm not really getting the full picture, the full perspective. I'm sure there are a lot of interesting stories that could be told from the perspective of someone in St. Louis or Detroit, or a smaller city like that. I say this mainly because Denver, the city in which I have been born and raised, has not a single movie to its name. And this is utterly bizarre, considering it has existed since 1900 and currently has, I believe, the 19th largest population in the country. It is insane to consider that no movie is both set here and filmed here. There is not one movie that is set in Denver and filmed in Denver, despite our enormous population and our far-reaching history and heritage. Denver has no movies to speak of, and I think this is a disturbing prospect. Well, except my movies, like Vice and the Orwellians, which you can get on VHS right now by writing to Nicholas Cicada, 1424 Columbine Street, number 1, Denver, Colorado 80206, for $15 a VHS tape. But that's not what we're talking about right now. Back to the topic at hand. There are only 2 movies that are set in Colorado. The Shining, which is filmed entirely in Oregon, and you can tell it's filmed entirely in Oregon, even though it was inspired by the Stanley Hotel up in Estes, to which I've been. Well, I haven't been to the hotel, but I've been to Estes Park. I've seen the Stanley Hotel. It looks nothing like the Overlook Hotel. The Shining is a great movie, undoubtedly, and Stanley Kubrick is a fantastic director, but every time I see these Oregon mountains and I'm told that they're the Rockies, I just am like, yeah, these aren't the Rockies, because I know what the mountains I've lived next to for my entire life look like. And in this sense, I feel like the film is kind of insulting my intelligence, because yeah, those aren't the Rockies, those are Oregon mountains. They look so different geologically and just scenery-wise that it's kind of bizarre to be told that that's how the Rockies look. The Shining, great movie, and it's set in Colorado, and that's nice, but it's not filmed in Colorado, which I find kind of bizarre. The mountains never even get that snowy, really. So I'm watching The Shining and I'm there's a kind of disconnect between what I'm seeing and what I'm being told is happening on screen. I'm like, oh, this is Colorado? Okay. And it's the same when I saw the sequel to The Shining, Doctor Sleep. I was confused because you have, the main characters driving into the same Oregon mountains, and it's being said that this is Colorado, but it's clearly not. It's Oregon. And, so that's just kind of a big problem with the movie, a continuity error, if you will. Someone who has never been to a Colorado mountain in their life probably won't see it as such, but I nonetheless pick up this visual discrepancy. You could argue, of course, that the entirely constructed Greenwich Village in Eyes Wide Shut is a similar example of a movie just not caring that much for internal consistency, but that's clearly a set, whereas The Shining seems to go out of its way to film on mountains when it could have just filmed on these other mountains that would have made it more internally consistent. Great movie, again, but, seriously, should have been shot in Colorado, or at least, the scenes where they're driving up, because, I can tell those aren't Colorado mountains. The other movie, which is set in Colorado, and I would argue is culturally relevant, has to be Dumb and Dumber. Now, it's set in Colorado for the last 40-ish minutes, and it is shot in Colorado. It's shot in Aspen. And this is great. I think Dumb and Dumber does a great job of capturing Aspen and the touristy hotels and casinos and that, but I wouldn't define it as a Colorado movie just because neither of the main characters are from Colorado, and they spend half the movie not in Colorado. The Coloradan setting seems to be completely incidental. So as a result, I can't classify it in good conscience as a Colorado movie. Now, there are a lot of Los Angeles and New York movies. There are movies entirely set in New York, featuring characters who are New Yorkers, who live in New York and do things in New York all day and never once leave New York. And I think I'd like to see a movie like that, but in Denver, instead of When Harry Met Sally, instead of it being set in some kind of corner delicatessen, which is a New York thing. How about a romantic comedy set in a Greek restaurant? That's a Denver thing. I don't see any of that, and this is a lack of diversity on the part of Hollywood, who seem to be only capable of setting movies in two locations, Los Angeles or New York. Now, of course, there are some exceptions to the rule, but the fact stands that when you are basing all your movies out of one city in California, you're not going to get as much diversity as you possibly could. Now, you're probably saying, well, don't you need to get permits to film in a city which isn't Los Angeles? And the reason Hollywood is so commonly used for movies is because you don't need as many permits, and they're more lax about shooting movies, and they kind of open up the streets and studios and sets and everything to be conducive to movies. And I would say that's a load of horseshit. We are living in 2022, and when Hollywood first started out with Chaplin and Keaton and that, you kind of had to concentrate all the talent because film and cameras were hard to get a hold of. They were a new technology and they weren't accessible to the general public, so you had to concentrate the access to them in one spot. But it's 2022 now, and I'm filming this on a really affordable and basic digital camera that captures a great picture, great sound, really great video. It's great for taking photos, and it's incredibly reliable. I've used it for 3 years straight, and it's never let me down even once. So the argument that making movies is difficult these days is laughable. Access to film technology is literally in your phone, although I would suggest getting a digital camera because most phones aren't built for, as cameras, so they're not going to be very good. I would at least suggest making use of the technology that is available to you. As for permits, I would argue that if we are going to say that the world's copyright system is outdated, as the argument has often been made, should we not also argue that permit laws that were written back in 1920 when movie making involved fucking, Harold Lloyd, shouldn't we argue that those permit laws are also outdated and need to be brought up to speed, there's an idea, you know. Now here in Denver, of course, since we aren't barbarians, it's actually perfectly legal to film anywhere you fucking want, so long as you don't, you know, film people without their permission, or like if they're in the background and they're blurry and they're just a couple pixels, probably doesn't matter, but you know, just don't follow anyone around and like harass them or anything. You'll be a-okay, you'll be fine. Now, of course, Los Angeles' ridiculously lax rules concerning this have led to annoying vlogsters like, you know, the Vlog Squad and the Hype House and the like, who go through the streets like a ragtag circus just harassing random people because they feel that by living in Movie City this gives them free license to do whatever they want in public, which absolutely is not the case and is not something I would advocate for. However, I believe it needs to be made much, much easier for filmmakers to shoot on location where a story is set, as opposed to getting somewhere else and pretending that it's that location, which is lazy and effortless and should not be excused. Probably the worst example of this in recent memory is Spike Lee's BlacKkKlansman, which I went to see, and it's a fantastic story, and Ron Stallworth is absolutely a heroic figure, an icon, if you will. But it is a Coloradan story by default. It takes place in Colorado Springs, to which I have been, and when I see a New York town calling itself Colorado Springs, when I see exterior shots that are clearly not Colorado Springs with no mountains in sight, I am like disturbed. It's the same effect I get with The Shining. I'm like, it's saying this is Colorado Springs, but like it's not. And sure, BlacKkKlansman is set in the 70s, so to make it period accurate, you'd have to clear out these streets in Colorado Springs and fill them up with 70s accurate cars, and you know, that might require a little bit of finagling, but why shoot it in New York? This is nonsense. When I see streets that do not exist in Colorado Springs, and like places that don't exist in Colorado Springs that are clearly just New York, it's not right, you know, because this is the story of Ron Stallworth, who is a Coloradan and an icon of the state, and I feel that this kind of does his story a disservice to film the entire movie in not his state. That's kind of like a slap in the face, which isn't to say BlacKkKlansman's a bad movie or anything. I liked it, it was good, but as a Coloradan I was able to notice, hey, this isn't Colorado Springs, you know? Like, it's just not. And, you know, that's not so good, you know. To someone who lives in the state, it's a surreal experience. Because I've been to Colorado Springs, and while I don't personally, you know, think about Colorado Springs as much as Denver, I can still tell if something is shot actually in Colorado Springs or not. And, like, it was so obviously not Colorado Springs. Big slap in the face to any Coloradan who watched it, especially, you know, Ron Stallworth, who's like Coloradan. Yeah, I'd say that's a lack of representation there. There are so many interesting stories from across America, from Detroit and St. Louis and, you know, Cincinnati, I'm sure. Interesting stories all the way, but none of them will ever be told because they have extremely restrictive permit options. And oh no, you know, and I get it, to clear out a street and fill it with fake cars or whatever, you know, that's an expensive proceeding, especially in New York or whatnot. You know, you have to literally barricade an entire street and fill it up with only extras. Or you can do like I do and just shoot whatever you want, so long as you're not shooting people. You can shoot cars, you can shoot trees, you can shoot the sky, you can shoot whatever the flip you want, so long as you're not invading anyone's privacy. You can also use any indoor place, you know, use a fucking basketball court. Nobody really cares that much. Now, I would of course endorse, you know, researching your local legislation. However, I think that it is important to produce film and like produce visual content, and if we're not getting a wide range of perspectives from a wide range of areas, like really cool spots, like, you know, what's the point really? This is what the internet was supposed to do. This is what YouTube was supposed to do. But these days, all the big YouTubers, it seems, live in Los Angeles instead of, internet videos being from a wide range of perspectives, because it's literally allowing you to, reach a wider audience than film would allow you to, since film is monopolized in Los Angeles. Instead of that, what we have is the same old shtick. Everyone's agent and manager and all this business heavy shit is located in Los Angeles, and that ultimately defeats the purpose of art, especially decentralized art. What is the point of the internet if it essentially serves the same purpose as film studios? There's really no rhyme or reason to it, and it annoys me to no end. So again, I think geographic diversity is something which film has always struggled with and will probably continue to struggle with for decades. But I would suggest investing in a good quality digital camera and filming whatever you want to, because remember, budget is really a myth. And to make the excuse that, movies require a lot of budget or whatever, they really don't. You need a camera, you need a couple props, maybe a set. That's really all you need to make an entertaining product. That's all you need in today's day and age. And if we are indeed embracing modernity, why not embrace the technological innovations and convenience that modern day digital photography offers to us as consumers and as producers? I think that the Hollywood system is ridiculously outdated, and to think that we are still going crazy over Hollywood studios in this day and age is a testament to how seriously we don't take movies. There are plenty of great examples of really low budget films that, did not require that much finagling or legal swampness, or, they didn't really require that much hassle. Like Kevin Smith's Clerks. That thing is about as lo-fi as it gets. It's just a gas station. Entertaining movie. You take the first Halloween. Incredibly low-budget movie. They just got, John Carpenter just has his camera on a flippin' radio flyer wagon practically. Just out in the middle of suburbia, just tracking Laurie Strode and Michael Myers hiding behind the bushes, and it is an incredibly effective and well-made movie. Low budget and guerrilla filmmaking in this day and age is pretty much the way to go, and it's where I see all the innovation being made in the upcoming century. I think film studios are an outdated way of producing things and distributing things, and these days, especially with everyone going all gaga over streaming services, why not just cut out the middleman entirely and produce and distribute your own content on your own? You don't need the middleman anymore. You don't need Sony, you don't need Netflix, you don't need Universal. That's what the internet provides. It provides instant promotion for any filmmaker, any artist of any kind. So I think in the years ahead, it's very important to keep in mind that you can produce art, you can express yourself in an interesting and thought-provoking way, and I think it's absolutely disturbing to see all these movies that are still produced in the same freaking Californian city with no diversity as far as location goes, and they just slap a joint on a palm tree and call it Colorado. It's not, film where your movie is set, and set your movies in more interesting places. There are so many interesting spots across America that you can film in right now. It's easy, it's fun, and it's a great hobby, and I don't know why more people don't do it. I think there's some kind of weird mystique built around filmmaking, but there really isn't any mystique to it. If you're talented, your movies will be good, no matter how much money you pour into them, no matter how many big-name actors you attach to them. If you're a talented person, your movies will be good, whether you're a Californian or not. I think it is absolutely ridiculous the extent to which Hollywood still controls modern filmmaking, and I will continue to make movies that are filmed and shot exclusively in Denver, because I think Denver needs more filmmakers and more artists and more writers and more musicians and more of everything. it is bizarre the amount to which Denver has like no culture of its own. And considering it's been around for over 100 years and has like the 19th highest population in the country and is the capital of the state, I don't know how there's not more movies and music and stuff here. It's wild. But that's what I'm here to provide. You know, I'm not just talking. I make content and I stand by it, and I am proud of my city, and I think it's important to be proud of your city, support your local artists, and respect local filmmaking, because people do put effort into small-scale, independently distributed film, and that's a very interesting avenue to go down these days. Above all else, like, Hollywood is just stupid at this point. And I think it's important to remember that nobody really needs to watch a big-time Hollywood movie anymore. It can be fun, but it's not necessary. And to think that, like, Hollywood still controls most of the movie industry is ridiculous. Music doesn't have this much control and monopolization over it, so I don't see why movies should. Just a thought. That's my recommendation for how to increase diversity in movies. Set your movies in more places, and diversity will just naturally follow because you'll have more people who are speaking from a wider range of perspectives than just Californians walking down Santa Monica Pier and being like, hey, I'm from California. Cali all the way, baby. Surfing USA. Oh my gosh, is that Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello? Oh my gosh, you know. That's really boring. It's really insipid. And, man, movies are boring because of it. Some advice, you know. Be sure and, you know, enjoy small-scale movies. They can be just as much fun as big-budget stuff. And there's no reason, in all honesty, why any city shouldn't be able to have a big-budget movie of its own. Using people who live in that city as actors and crew members, and also produced by that city. Heck, cities could pour civic money into creating fun movies for people in that city to enjoy. It's just important to have a wide range of viewpoints and ideas expressed, not just California. So, just a thought. That's about it for this video, and, you know, just kind of a wacky observation I've made about modern day filmmaking. It's really weird how few movies are like outside of Los Angeles or New York. It's pretty crazy. That's gonna do it for this video. If you enjoyed, be sure and check out my comics, movies, whatever. I try and do Denver right. I try and provide as much original content as possible. A legacy for the city that has provided me with so much inspiration and so many nice days and pleasant nights. So that's going to do it for this video. Sayonara, suckers.